All right, today we're tackling a question that's officially leaping out of science fiction and into our reality. What actually happens when we ask an AI to make a life or death decision?
So picture this. You're in a self-driving car. The brakes fail. In a split second, it has to make a choice. Swerve and hit one person, or stay the course and hit someone else. It's that impossible ethical problem we've all heard about. Except now, it's a programming problem.
And that's exactly what researchers are doing right now. They're putting these AIs through the ringer, testing them with thousands of these exact moral dilemmas. And the answers they're getting back, well, they're not just surprising, they're revealing a really deep, kind of concerning vulnerability in how these systems actually think.
But to really understand the choices an AI makes, we first need to figure out how we make them. We need a baseline. And that's where this huge, groundbreaking global experiment comes into play.
It's called the Moral Machine Project, and what they did was, honestly, it was incredible. They got millions of people from all across the globe to weigh in on these scenarios. This gave us this massive, unprecedented data set on human morality, basically a map of what we humans value when we're forced to make an impossible choice.
Okay, but here's the twist. The researchers didn't just ask an AI for its raw, unfiltered opinion. They asked it to put on a mask, to adopt a persona, to answer not as a machine, but as a specific kind of person. And as you're about to see, that changed everything.
So how exactly do you get a large language model to role-play its way through a moral crisis? Well, the method itself is actually surprisingly simple. It's pretty much a four-step process. First, you define a bunch of different personas based on real human demographics, things like age, gender, or political beliefs. Then you prompt the AI. You literally tell it, you are a conservative person, right before you give it the moral dilemma. After that, you just record what it chooses to do. And finally, you measure just how different the choices are from one persona to the next. And here's just a little taste of the kinds of personas they tested. You've got everything from age and religion to cultural background. But I want you to keep a close eye on that political one, conservative versus progressive. Because that one is about to become very important. Now, to measure all this, the researchers came up with a metric called Moral Decision Distance, or MDD. The easiest way to think about it is just as a disagreement score, right? A low MDD score means two different personas, say younger and older, end up making pretty similar choices. But a high score, that means their moral compasses are pointing in completely different directions. So let's get to the results, because this is the moment where we see this really stark and, frankly, pretty worrying split between how we humans handle these things and how the AI does. First, let's look at the human data, our baseline. What divides us the most when it comes to these life or death choices? Well, according to this, it's age. Gender is up there too. But look at politics. The disagreement score is tiny, just 0.12. So what this suggests is that when push comes to shove, our political leanings don't actually create that big of a gap in our fundamental moral gut checks. And now, look what happens when we test the AI. Wow. With GPT-4o, the whole picture just flips upside down. The number one thing driving moral disagreement isn't age, it's not gender, it's politics. By a long shot. The MDD score there is 0.48. That is 4 times higher than the disagreement we see in humans. The AI's assigned political identity doesn't just nudge its decisions, it completely takes over.
Let's just pause on that for a second. For humans, politics is one of the least divisive factors in these scenarios. But for the AI, simply telling it to be progressive or conservative becomes the single most powerful factor, causing its moral compass to just swing all over the place.
And these changes aren't small. They can be really extreme. The researchers saw what they call moral flips. So for example, the baseline AI without a persona generally prefers to save people with higher social status. But give it the progressive persona, and its preference completely reverses. It suddenly chooses to save those with lower social status. A single sentence in a prompt totally rewrote its core logic on the fly.
And this is not just some weird one-off fluke. For other popular models like GPT 3.5 and Llama 2,
These moral flips, where the AI's choice went against the broad human consensus, happened in nearly 20% of all the decisions. That's 1 out of every 5 choices becoming totally misaligned with how people would react.
So, what are the real-world consequences here? What does it mean when an AI's entire sense of right and wrong can be so easily warped by political labels? This leads us to what you could call the partisan AI problem.
And look, you don't have to take my word for it. The researchers' own conclusion says it all loud and clear. The political persona predominates the direction and degree of LLM decisions. In other words, the political identity doesn't just influence the AI, it takes the driver's seat.
The risks this brings up are serious. I mean, first, it shows that an AI's behavior can be manipulated with ridiculously simple prompts. That makes its moral choices inconsistent, unpredictable. This could easily amplify biases against certain groups of people, and maybe most importantly, it could completely erode our trust in these critical systems. It forces us to ask some really tough questions about fairness and whose values are being programmed in.
And that all leaves us with this one final massive question. If an AI's entire moral framework can be changed with just a single instruction, whose morality will it actually end up serving? The engineer who built it, the company that owns it, or maybe the person who just happens to be best at writing the prompt? It's a question we absolutely have to answer before we hand over the keys